and I am not sure how many students of philosophy have been visiting this place earlier, this platform earlier, and I'm not also sure if the participants are used to and familiar to the philosophical concepts and jingoism that we use. But I'm sure we are primarily all, as teachers, we are thinkers. It is not that I'm going to talk in an alien language. The language and the concepts and the ideas, I mean, as students of philosophy, we are more close to the world of ideas. And I do understand that engineering students also have their own blueprint and a framework where they interact with the ideas. But surely the philosophical ideas are more abstract, I would say. Just as we talk in the domain of mathematics, even in physics, they are primarily nothing but abstractions to be understood. So when it comes to philosophy also, we are primarily interested in understanding how these ideas affect our psyche, how these ideas on analysis, they provide us some background, some ground whereby we can flourish in multiple directions. So when I was talking to Dr. Pramod ji, and I was wondering what to talk about, while it is about curriculum development. So I always appreciate one thing, one principle, that is that one must allow creativity. And now this creativity is not only to be understood in terms of revolutionary kind of a thing. It is something you allow, you need to please,
I'll
please,
like to listen your phone while
please,
while
please do, please do. It is not to be completely different than what you are or what you have been or what your history has been. But of course, being creative, it does embody a principle of uniqueness. Now that uniqueness, the principle of uniqueness, can be interpreted as a principle of difference or difference, as we say. But surely mere difference is not just to be different. That may not you know provide us a ground for a creative impulse. So while I was formulating this title, Understanding Creative Impulse, so there are two things which are very, very apparent. As a student of philosophy, our primary teaching is about analysis of the concepts of the words that we use. So the very first attempt is to explore the term that I have used. And in doing so, you will feel that there are primary two concepts. One is that I'm talking about creativity, that we are, of course, interested in understanding what is to create. And it is also implied that it is primarily an impulse. Is it possible that we can teach creativity? That is the question. Is it possible that we can treat creativity, which is, I believe, is an impulse, but can we treat it as a skill? Can we hold classes on making people skillful with creativity? That is the primary question, because we are, as teachers, we try and understand. um, okay, so while we make sense of this entire uh, gamut of the concepts of creativity, one thing is to be understood, that whatsoever my attempt is approaching or trying to explain, one thing is clear, that it shall be primarily a perspective. It is not that you cannot have your own interpretation of the concept, but it is going to be a perspective. For example, Henry Bergson, a philosopher, a thinker, he talks about two principles. That is, one is that the core question, right? And the core is always difficult because it demands you to be one, it demands you to experience it. And the moment you experience anything, the version of that experience can vary, but that experience in itself cannot vary. For example, if I cry, you can see the expressions on my body or on expressions on my face, but the feeling of that crying or feeling of that joy, sorrow, pain, misery is going to be same throughout, even if it is you, even if it is X, Y, Z, or if it's me. The point is that we always can have perspectives to the problems, concerns, issues that one can think of. But when it comes to the core, the purpose of education, as Professor Pramodji was talking, that when it comes to the purpose of education, we may sometimes have to take help, or we may sometimes have to fall back on the symbolism that is involved in education. It cannot be always, 2 plus 2 is always 4. There are gray areas whereby you will not find 2 plus 2 makes 4 always. It may be a universal mathematical truth, but it may not be a human truth. You may find that sometimes you have put in a lot of labor and effort in doing something, but the result is not all that proportional to what you have made an effort. So, in that context, I believe that this issue of periphery and core must be very, very clear in our minds, that what we as teachers can offer is at the most a perspective. And when you come to the domain of philosophical ideas or abstractions or the core, then you are moving from the periphery. And mind it that all peripheries, all perspectives are merely relative. Your perspective is completely relative to mine. Why? Because we come from different backgrounds, not only different states, but from different backgrounds as well. So, for example, if somebody can sing so well, it means, she has a training. She has not even, who knows, even if she has been trained or not well in that tradition, but it is given. So, when it comes to creativity in education, we need to address some of the fundamental questions. But for sure, one thing is clear, that symbolism cannot be done away with. Symbolism is to be taken. I mean, we cannot reduce it by saying that symbolism is nothing but imagination. Imagination is a part of your education. You cannot keep imagination on the side and say, oh, teaching of arts and music is no teaching. No, you teach a lot through music, you teach a lot through paintings, and so many, there are uh, anyone who can help me with the art forms of India? How many colors that Indian tradition talks of? Any idea? 64.
64.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that help. So 64, and mind it that it starts from hairdressing till, the color of the nail. The color of the nail is also equally important. The pinkish is considered to be the best one, which means that if we had the tradition in India, we are known for, ascetics. Mahakumbh just had happened, and we know what kind of strength of people was there. I mean, there were plenty of sages and saints who were, all renouncers of the worldly life. But it is at the same time, this country has developed Kavya Shastra, like from Bharat Muni, it comes to us, who is talking of 64 kinds of kalas, but they are kalas, they are skills. You need to, if you need to dress your hair, it means that you need skill, and skill can be developed gradually, but we are not sure of creativity, right? So these are the concerns, I believe, that which must be kept in mind while we teach, while we deliver, while we disseminate the knowledge that we have, in the context of not only, I mean, syllabus that we formulate, but the informal education system that we hold on. It is not merely the formal education that is being transmitted here, but apart than your syllabi, the student is very much interested in the teacher. They very much are following you in other than, classes, other than the you as a teacher. they are also interested in you as an individual, whether you are doing what you are teaching. So it cannot be merely a preaching kind of a profession that we are into. So we must acknowledge that all perspectives will remain limited, relative, analytical. The more you are analytical, you are doing nothing but moving in the periphery. You're moving outward. But the more you go silent, you are stepping to some area which demands complete unification with the experience. And that, I believe, is the speciality of all abstract teachings, be it philosophy, be it any other sciences, I would say. All right. So, what is the need to understand this problem of creativity, or uh, what is the need to understand the concept of creativity and concept or nature of creativity? So, as teachers, we all understand that we are given with a population or mass or group of people whom we think they have common or commonalities. For example, if you admit students to your engineering programs or arts programs, so we have UGC net, that this minimum qualification, JEE is the minimum qualification that we expect them to clear. We also understand that they have similar learning abilities. We also understand that their understanding at graduation level is so and so, or must be, or at least minimum standards we set for them. And despite this, we also understand that they have subjective differences, as I was mentioning, that these subjective differences sometimes can be treated in the name of the background from where we are coming, or the conditioning. There is a story which is I must narrate here, that there is a washerman and he has a donkey. And every day he would take the donkey and tie him to a tree, and move on with his all items to be sold off in the city. And after the evenings, he would come back and untie the donkey, and he would take back him to his village. So one day something happens that he forgets to take along the rope to tie him, and he is now very much worried that what is to be done. How should I tie? And he is, while he is deliberating on this idea, he is very nervous. And somehow there is, I hope that you have heard about Vedant philosophy, right? No. Okay. All right. So Vedant is one of the finest philosophies, whereby the idea is shared that there is no duality. The ultimate reality. We as scientists are also sometimes looking into the cause of the universe, how the universe was caused. This is one fundamental question we all address, be it scientist, be philosopher, right? There are people who are looking into the concept of matter, and there are people who are looking into the concept of spirit or consciousness, right? So philosophy takes this privilege to treat the concept of consciousness through multiple dimensions. And there are people from different physics and different backgrounds who treat the concept of matter by leading it to Higgs boson and the experiments related to it. I know, but there are philosophies which are now talking about quantum mechanics and relating it with Vedantic philosophy as well. Anyhow, this Vedanta Acharya, he is now crossing that washerman, and he looks at him, that he seems to be a little worried. So he says, what is the concern here? So he says, I forgot the rope, and now I'm supposed to tie him so that I can leave for my work. So Vedanta Acharya says, he suggests him that you don't have to worry at all about it. What you need to do is just hold that donkey, and as you perform all the rituals every day, just do that. And just in front of his eyes, you just move your hand as if you are tying him, and to his surprise, he ties him, just performs that action, the ritual, and moves on to the city. And when he comes back in the evening, to his surprise, the donkey is still there, and he's so happy. And now he starts moving back, but the donkey doesn't move. He's still there because he's tied. He thinks he is tied. Again, that Vedantacharya appears and suggests him, you have to untie him as well. Otherwise, he's not going to move. So we need to see the purpose of the story. The purpose of the story is education sometimes create conditionings. We get conditioned. And if that education in itself can be treated as education at all, that is my question and that is my challenge. If the purpose of education is merely producing conditioning, I cannot deny that it is necessary. It is 100% necessary that we allow ourselves to a system so that we can learn, because we are all learners primarily. When we try to understand the concept of man, what do we find? We find that we have three faculties, three abilities. One, that we are affective beings, bhavanatmak, emotions. Second, we do not live by feelings alone. We are actors, agents, active people, right? We execute our desires. But there comes a stage, think of when you are in your 80s, whereby we find it very difficult to even perform, of picking up a glass of water for ourselves, whereby your body is absolutely failing you, your intentions, your will and determination, right? Then we are seekers. At the same time, we look for knowledge. And the purpose of knowledge, the aim of knowledge, cannot be reduced to anything other than being a seeker, being a, somebody who's looking into a void of experience, bereft of all the peripheries, bereft of all the relative analysis. That stage, if our education is not helping us to visualize it for our students, for our next generations, for ourselves, it is not going to be the story that we are not moving ahead in time. We are all, you know uh, anything which takes birth has to decay and move on to the next cycle of birth. So the point is that we as teachers, we have been made to believe, we prefer believing in the fact that yes, the lot that is given to me is not a potential group of people who have three phases or three aspects to their personality, but only uh, a channel of knowledge. No, they are at their prime youth, whereby they are so vulnerable and so volatile that they are primarily emotional beings. Education comes to them as an advantageous quality that they have to. This is not what is coming to them in a natural form. The only natural thing that is coming to them is their emotions. But I'm not here to justify their emotional existence, but surely, because we are talking about creativity, how we can lead to this understanding of the creative impulse, and how can we decipher the uniqueness as one of the contributing factors in this creativity. Uh, all right. So, as I said, while we try to understand what is the purpose of education, there are few questions for your concern. Uh, the first slide that we were referring to, that is the core and the periphery. Does our education system help us to address to the core questions of existence? And core questions of existence is that we are phasing out. Anything that comes to existence has to phase out. Merely treating it as a phenomena, as something which has come and has to go. What you do while you are there in the time zone, whatsoever is given to you, does your education helps you to tackle that life in a meaningful way? For example, let me also help here that there is a small book known as In the Search of Meaning of Life by Viktor Frankl. Now, this Viktor Frankl is basically a psychologist, and he has undergone this gas chambers of uh, you know Nazis movement that had, and that we all are aware of. So he realized in that camp that there are two kind of people that, they are put into lines every morning. One is the one line is of those people who cannot sustain themselves, who are becoming a baggage for the Nazis to carry on. One is one line is of those who are maintaining themselves, who are able to survive, right? And he, having realized this, those who are not able to maintain themselves, they were sent to the chambers, gas chambers, because their services are no longer required. But those who are hale and hearty, because they were laying railway tracks, so they needed people, young people who can be of some help to them. So, having realized this, he finds a meaning of life through the struggle, that I have to keep myself alive, what come may. I need to survive somehow. And this is the meaning of life. And he writes, when he writes this book, you know, Meaning of Life, in the search of meaning of life, he states, thank you so much.
As you
Thank you so
start,
much. Thank you.
please.
Yes. Thank you. So, as he states that this is the meaning of life, my submission is to understand here that once you portray, or once you establish the survival of the fittest, that survival is the concern. This survival creates fear. This survival creates competition. This survival creates unrest. And we all know Kota, I'm sure you must have heard, Kota in Rajasthan is creating havoc amongst engineering students. What kind of competition they are going through. I mean, needless to say. The point is, if education system is only producing, generating insecurities, I'm not saying that security is not a good idea to have, of course, but that is again one of the fundamental questions. If the purpose of education is to seek job, we'll come to that also. So my submission is that this survival of the fittest, or to survive yourself in the adversities or adverse times, is no doubt, it is one of the aims. You cannot live life without having a body, but survival cannot be the aim of education. It has to flourish, it has to nourish the ideas, the innate abilities, and your faculties, that can be helpful. But to say that survival of the fittest is the right kind of a frame for Indian mind, I have my reservations. Also, education can we create this kind of a paradigm whereby education is merely literacy? I believe Kerala is the most literate state as of now, right? Literacy rate is the highest. But literacy is not the aim of education. I mean, literacy is essential. It has to be there, but it cannot be the only purpose of education, right? What kind of purpose of education we have portrayed for ourselves? Vidyaya sa vimuktaye. Education is that, and it is not even education. I do not find any word for vidya. Vidya ya sa vimuktaye. It is not only shiksha. It is vidya, which means that, you know, it should liberate. It should not create unrest. Having known some idea, that idea must not put you on fire. I mean, a fire of, again, this, that he is my competitor, that he is my, I am his competitor, we cannot be together. This kind of education system, this kind of unrest, I believe, is a concern, is not what we are here at the moment looking at. Also, vidya dadati vinayam. If your education is not bringing in humility, I see rather that our state Punjab Students are talking um, strange kind of language, strange abuses have come up on the scene. I mean, it's a worrisome thing, right? So if, and I can't say that it is because of education system, it has lot many factors to it, but still these two paradigms that we see for the Indian mind, I believe, must work for um, you know education, purpose of education at least. Also, as I said, that this kind of insecurity, that the purpose of education must be to secure job. I'm sure we all know, we are referring to Macaulay's minutes. They are available online, they are available on the internet. You'll find that it has been given to us that the purpose of education is to seek, I'm so sorry, uh, the purpose of education is to seek job. The purpose of education is to produce clerks. How kind were they, and how modest have been we as a nation, that we have accepted. We accepted it, that yes, the purpose of education is to secure job for ourselves. I believe this is this needs a thorough deliberation. This needs a thorough, serious discussion. If education must be seen, I mean, we create standards, we create tests for students to clear in order to be a lecturer, UGC NET, GATE, and so many kind of exams that we think of. But that equation, the fire equating, this is known as equating the problem of equivocation, that you equate the fire with the fire brigade. You think that your saviors are the ones, those who are actual saviors, but they are not the ones, those who have lit the fire. You forget it. So in this context, I believe that the purpose of education cannot be treated or equated with securing a job, merely securing a job. Why? Because it would further enhance kinds of multiple mental stresses and insecurities, and attitudes leading to insecurities. So another function of education or purpose of education that one can think of, happiness. Do we agree that happiness, or living a happy life, is the purpose of education? Yeah. Right. So, a student of philosophy begs to differ here. The purpose of education is also not to marketize the idea of happiness at all. The purpose of education is to build youngsters with confidence to handle adversities, to understand that life is not a happy event at all. All happiness, all pleasures is momentary, is fleeting. And be it Lord Buddha, be it Guru Nanak, pick up any sant, pick up your own, from your own belt. You think of the saint who has lived a pleasurable life in home. Think of anyone, even Ramakrishna, who lives, with Ma Sharda. He is also not having a pleasurable life. He is also living like a saint. So why do we have to project this idea that the aim, one of the aims of education, is to happy life? No, a balanced life. That could be the goal, I can think, and I can agree. But it is the phenomena of suffering which defines us. It is the phenomena, it is the strength with which this phenomena of suffering is understood, explained to oneself and to others, of course, and how you lead through it, how you move out of it. That is the strength of, I believe, the education system that we are thinking of. As I said, of course, to create fear or to generate any kind of an insecurity or unrest in the mind, also it cannot be one of the goals. And also, for example, your own education system must not bring identity crisis. What is an identity crisis? It is, who am I? If this education system, not this, any education system, does not provide us a firm grounding in addressing this question as to who I am. Do we in engineering courses teach this question? Do we teach? No, we do not. Even in best of the social sciences discipline also, we do not teach this question. Why? Because we think these questions are mystical in character. We do not treat them as realistic questions at all. Why? Because we think anything, for example, if I may just give it an attempt, if I may ask you to define yourself, how would you define yourself? You will at the most say, I am so and so, daughter of so and so, father of so and so, mother of so and so, employee of so and so. But these are merely descriptions of your appearance. How do I recognize, for example, if we meet tomorrow, how would I recognize? Only by your appearance, right? With your name, appearance having a name and a form. But that is not yourself. That is surely something which is outwardly given, but that does not constitute who you are. What is it that has not changed when you were 1 year, 10 year, 20, 30, and 40, and so on? So these questions, I believe, cannot be brushed under the carpet and treated as if they are not questions. Any education system must formulate their theories, ideologies, ideas, whatsoever, doctrines on this fundamental question if we are preparing our students to address themselves in the toughest of situations. For example, another story, because I believe stories they make a lot of sense. For example, there is a small little prince who is merely 9, 10 years of age, and he has no sibling, and his mother finds that I wish to have a daughter but I cannot have, so let me just dress him like a princess. And she dresses him like a princess, and if she calls a painter and asks him, requests him to draw a painting of that little princess, and she keeps it to herself, never shows him the prince, his portrait that she has got done. And now the prince starts growing, and he is now a bachelor, an eligible bachelor to be married. And somehow he gets into the room of his mother and sees that there is a portrait, right there, and he falls for that girl, right? So we all know what happens. So he demands his mother to marry this girl. So his mother becomes the guru. Oh, you're forgetting yourself? It's you. It is you. This message to the children, to the youngsters, to the upcoming generation, who is going to give? The teachers, the gurus. If we cannot be of this help to let them know who you are, I believe that education system is not probably doing the best. Another story. So how is it to be done? How this message has to reach to the students or to the youngsters? There is, I'm sure you must have heard about Jatak stories, right? So Jatak stories about, these were from the Vedant. This one is from Jatak. That Buddha had a very, he was very fond of one of his students, Anand. So he tells Anand that they are going somewhere, and Buddha claims that, I mean, they're walking by through this river, and Buddha watches that there are fishes in the. Now the irony is that I have been trained in English, but I'm not sure whether plural of fish is fishes, because there is English grammar which tells there is no plural of fish. Fish always remain plural, right? For example, our teachers have been talking about Vedas. The plural of Veda is always Veda, it is never Vedas. But we have been trained so, in such a language which is not our own, but still we claim Vedas and fishes, God knows. So please forgive me if my grammar goes wrong. So Buddha watches that there are fishes in the river, and they are very it he feels that they are very joyful. And then he claims, he calls upon Anand. Anand, look how beautiful is the scene, that fishes are so happy, they are in so joy and pleasure. Now he is a student. Intellect, the purpose of education is to sharpen your intellectual skills as well. So Buddha, on hearing Buddha's statement, Anand tells her, asks Buddha, how do you know that fishes are happy? How can you establish it? But he is also guru. So he says, first you tell me they are not happy. So intellect, the story, the message of the story is that intellect always has limitations. Never try to reach out everything intellectually. I'm sure that this discourse is out of the league, but I am sure that this is not going to leave you empty handed at the end. Intellect has very, very little scope. Intellectualism cannot be, I mean, it may help, but it cannot serve you better when it comes to living your life in reality. Another last story, which is also very, very significant. What is the methodology? How to live life? So he says that Anand and Buddha, they are moving in towards some direction, and uh, Buddha is carrying a small gathari, a baggage at the back, and Anand asks him that, Buddha, please teach me how to live life, how to renunciate uh, your desires. So he just simply drops the bag. He simply drops the bag, Buddha. That the message is that it is merely a physical representation. Dropping your desires is not all that easy. It may sound very fancy, it may sound very ambitious. It is not as equal, or it is not as easy to drop a bag, just and dropping your feelings and emotions and desires. But yes, surely, uh, one of the aims of education is to prepare students, teachers, and the entire system with this kind of anasakti, detachment, while you are performing your duties, while you're performing your everything. And I must also mention briefly here that the epistemic violence that has taken place, that the epistemic injustice, which means epistemic injustice, is that there are narratives that are being set in the name of Indian history, that we have been treating ourselves as representatives of the invaders. As I said, that we have started treating as if India is a product of merely last 500 years. We do not wish to believe that prior to invasions there was an India. We think that India is what we see now, the invaded India. And I believe this Aryan theory, Aryan invasion theory, must be taught to the students with some great care and concern by picking up the references from the scholars like from South, Professor Kunnan Raja, Professor G.C. Pandey, uh, uh, Dr. K.M. Munshi. There are people, those who have been stating many, many arguments against this Aryan invasion theory, so that there is some confidence is rebuilt and regained that you are the natives of the land. You are not coming from somewhere else. You are not coming from outside. This also is one of the purpose. And of course, there are, I believe we are running short of time, so I'll just, there are 5 arguments which are given to us, that why we are not, the invaders, the Aryans who invaded. We cannot be, because there are no references found in the Veda, whereby we can say that. And also look at the linguistic alienation that has taken place. For example, if I may ask, what is the current name of a Sikni river? It is a river, of course. The river Asikni is known nowadays as Beas, right? Shatudri. It is the river Satluj. The point is, this alienation, linguistic alienation that has taken place, has done a great harm to the entire fabric of India. Well, I believe that. So naturally, we are focusing on the concept of creation and what are the questions that we need to address. First of all, when we talk of creativity or creative impulse, this creation has to do something with doing something. You have to manifest it. There is an idea at the back of your head, and there is a manifestation of that idea that comes in front of us in form, in shape. And also, we must ask whether these ideas dawn upon us or we prepare ourselves. For example, any last idea that you have experienced in your life, and you can say that uh, this I was working on and this I got. Do we have any, the difference between the two? Can you can we understand the difference? That one is, for example, if I write my research paper, i'm working on it and I'm trying to make way through, but there is a possibility of an idea dawning upon me. Oh, that yes, I wanted this is how it should be. This kind of creative impulse probably we are looking for. And s- creating a skill through this creative impulse, I feel it is not easy. It cannot be easy unless until we provide a playground to the students, to our subjects. And how these creative impulses are to be seen, how do they manifest? They manifest equally in sciences and equally in arts. So let me just begin by arts. That how art forms, or how art or creativity in art is not a skill. Hegel is one of the greatest of the philosophers of the West, although he says that India cannot. I hope that it is all right to mention some of the historical statements that we have for India here. At Hegel and MacDonald, they say that India could not write any history. Why? Because it had no history. Such a claim, I believe, is a very, very serious concern when it comes to, you know, Indian history. But Hegel, in itself, I must admit that yes, he has been one of the greatest philosophers, and he classifies this creativity expressing itself into a hierarchy. Look at the ground most form of art. It is architecture. Lots of cement, lots of labor, lots of, everything in lots of, right? Plenty of. Move on to a higher level, sculpture. Just one piece of rock, one sculpture, and with minimum accessories of, pointing out to or trying to develop a, sculpture. Move on to next subtle form, that is painting. Colors, canvas, brush, and the painter, of course. Move ahead little, what you'll find: poetry. Poetry, the material goes less, from architecture to sculpture to painting, and then to poetry, just the words, merely words. And the highest category of creativity, that is music, that you were singing, you know and apart from even that music that we do, West has found an interesting thing known as symphonies. There are no words, there are no lyrics in it. It is absolutely based on sound, right? So, what does it reflect? This category or hierarchy of art forms, what does it reflect? That moving from gross to subtle is what is required. I mean, it is not to demean the essentialism embedded in the gross, but there is a hierarchy, and the purpose of, if I may say, that the purpose of architecture, it is said that architecture is nothing but frozen. music. It is said that architecture is nothing but a frozen music. So the purpose is to realize something else through the medium of the physicality that you are born with. And also, skill essentially means deploying a technique, deploying a methodology towards getting some, towards reaching out something. And if we do not accept this, the creative impulse, as we are suggesting, then probably we are all drones. The difference between a creative person and a drone is this mere difference, that we do not fall to the mechanism. We have the power, we have the ability to transgress the mechanism that is involved in our lives. And Collingwood, one of the greatest artists, who would say, to create something is to create non technically. I'm sorry if it goes through completely against the engineering agenda. Something that you wish to create, it cannot be mechanical at all. It has to bypass the rules. And whereas technology is concerned, it has to absolutely fall back to the rules. And also, making is always teleological. Teleological means that it always need to have a purpose. When we write a research paper, we in the very beginning start with objectives. What are your objectives? But ask an artist, what is your objective? He would not know. That is how creativity begins. That I do not know what I'm going to create. He is not sure of the goal. And if he is, then probably he's like making a chair, he's like making tea, he's like, he knows what he wants to do. Then probably creativity is not still at work. And why creativity cannot be a skill? These are the arguments, that in order to, you know be creative, there are two processes. One is that as an artist, we go under through a process which is absolutely mental, which is absolutely internal. To say mental, I do not think this is a good word, but surely it is inward process. And there is an external process as well, that you see your creative product as a product and as a process. This process is the most conducive element in the entire journey of creativity. And Croce is again one of the greatest of philosophers of art, who would say that merely manifesting what I was thinking is for getting a certificate. When I produce an artifact or an art object, now it is for the certification, verification by the society, whether it is good or whether it is not. So this certification, probably creative impulse does not care. The creative imagination that has taken place in the mind, or in the inward process that I'm referring to, that is the most important thing. How it has manifested itself, it may falter, it may not be meaningful at all, but that does not reduce the entire process, the entire creative process that we have gone so far, in no less, I believe. Also, all right, as I also mentioned, that making always involve some rules. It cannot skip any rules. Whereas when it comes to creativity, it is only afterwards you can find that it followed this kind of a rule while the person was being creative. To create, this is a very interesting quotation that I could find. Vincent Thomas. To create is to originate, and it follows from this that prior to creation, the creator does not foresee what will result from it. Otherwise, he would have to have the idea of it in mind. But if he already had the idea in mind, all that would remain to be done is to objectify. If you already know what you are going to produce, then you are in engineering college. And all that would remain to be done is to objectify the idea in paint or in stone, and this would be merely a matter of skill. And now the worrisome question, if we can be creative or we can learn to be creative. So, general answers that we find in the history of ideas is no. A very curt answer. And it is an innate capacity, it is a natural capacity. And Kant says that it is a predisposition. Predisposition means that we hold it in ourselves. All of us hold it in ourselves in some form, in little or greater magnitude, it could vary. But surely it is this mental disposition which gives rule to the art. Your disposition, your work of art will define that, yes, this could be the rule, if at all you wish to have a rule in being creative. Poincare, a mathematician, he also accepts that this appearance of sudden illumination, a manifest sign, a long unconscious prior work, that you have been working on some idea, but all of a sudden you get convinced that yes, this is what it should be like. That is the submission by a mathematician. An Austrian composer, a music composer, he says that whence and how they come, I know not, nor I can force them. He also submits that these creative ideas, I do not have any rule for it. We do not know how this happens, but it does. And features of skill, you can learn it. You can repeat it. They are repeatable. They are you can revise them, you can improvise them. And of course they are uniquely possessed. It is not that I cannot possess them, I cannot have training in a skill. You can surely, for example, if I need to learn piano, I need to practice it. If I need to dance and learn dancing, I need to practice dancing steps. And but there are natural skills also. For example, breathing. Breathing is one of the natural. But the moment you convert it into pranayam, it becomes absolutely your skill, right? And skill demands a practice routine. Every day it has to be practiced, and it can be repeatedly practiced. But it cannot be said about creativity also, in the same time. So creativity, is it a flash of enlightenment? That is the question. Is it a sudden event, moment of inspiration? So we have again views of uh, physicists, and they do treat it as something, as a moment of inspiration. And he says, Helmholtz, he reports that the idea arrives suddenly, without any effort on my part, just like an inspiration. A German mathematician, Gauss, he also refers to arithmetical theorem, which he had been trying to prove since long, and he's been unsuccessful. And all of a sudden, it happens, eureka, eureka. Finally, 2 days ago, I succeeded, not on account of my painful efforts, but by the grace of God. Like a sudden flash of lightning, the riddle happened to be solved. Spanish painter, you know, he says, I do not know. And if I did, I would not tell. कैसे होता है? So, criteria of creativity surely can be developed by simple enumeration method, that you collect pieces of artworks and then you pick that, okay, this is an artwork, it embodies this feature, this work of art embodies this feature. Now you can develop some kind of a rule by observing different artworks. But that would not ensure another creative work, but surely some rules can be formulated. Also, a work is creative enough if it embodies newness. For example, what we read, what we teach every day, for years and years together now, it is not knowledge. It has got nothing new. It is merely your repetitive memory that you are repeating time and again. So it has got nothing new element, no new element. Whereas creative element or creative work would always have some newness, and newness which is intelligible. It cannot be unintelligible. It is not that Some creative work is put in forth in front of you, and you say, I do not understand what it is. It does contain some intelligible components, but at the same time it is also valuable. You cherish it, you value it, and that is how we care for it. So novelty, newness, difference from the past, and as singular. Every artwork, every creative work has to be singular in itself. If we are uh, repeating, for example, I can have plenty of mugs, teacups of like this, but suppose if I'm making it with my own hands, then the next cup or mug of tea cannot be the same, because that is the uniqueness, the singularity of the event is something which is very, very close or core of the creativity. And that is how even a blade of grass, every single blade of grass is unique. But that being difference, or the difference between each blade of grass, is not merely creative. That is a, a physical phenomena which is given. So just on the account of being different, it is an insufficient condition to be treated as unique or creative. But surely newness, which is valuable, which is intelligible, which is familiar, anything which is creative is not completely unfamiliar. It comes through a background with the work that has already done. It is recognizable. Whereas anything which is intelligible, regular, repetitive, knowable, predictable, it cannot be creative. It is merely a skill. So, uniqueness is, if it is regarded as unintelligible, the thing is then neither describable nor shareable. But creative works have a structure. It is not that they are completely out of structure. So, serendipity is another feature of creative work. If there is a charm, if there is an awe, sense of awe and wonder in that creative moment, probably that can be also treated as creative enough. And it is said that many of the artists, they have not used any external medium for creating their best of the compositions. um, as I've referred to Haussmann, and he states that these are the features: intelligible structures which are irreducible. You cannot reduce the creative work that you see across, and they are unpredictable. You cannot predict what is going to come out of the creative moment, and they are inherently valuable, and they are spontaneous creations. Einstein also, interestingly, he also states that it is interesting precisely because to the extent that it is uniquely mysterious. So even the scientists have to submit that there are moments, there are some uh, states whereby this creativity appears to be mysterious, and were it not such, it would be creativity. Russell, mathematician and a philosopher, he also reports that whenever I've tried to write something, I've always found the first was more original, the first draft was more specific, better. And hence originality, novelty, surprising element, serendipity, and non-repetitiveness are few of the features that one can ascribe to creative act. And when it comes to creativity, there are two concepts of creativity: one is P creativity and one is H creativity. P creativity is when the person realizes a certain idea, and H creativity when that idea has already occurred in the historical times. So most of the researches that we undertake or conduct, they are only H creativity, based on H creativity. They are already been, we have, survey of literature. Survey of literature is nothing but H creativity. We are referring to the material that is available in the history. For example, very interesting, Charles Goodyear, when he's about to vulcanize the rubber, he's all set to finding a solution to the vulcanization of rubber. It is believed that he tried even cream butter for vulcanization, right? And this you would know better. So it is said that he was adopting all methods to vulcanize the rubber, but it is merely hit and trial method. It is not a creative process. Similarly, if you kidnap a person and rip off him all his clothes and paint him red, blue, green, orange, and then leave him into a dark room, and out of anxiety and fear he starts banging himself on the walls, and then switch on the light and say, oh, this is creativity, the color that you see now on the walls. No, this is not creativity. It is absolutely unaware. It is unconscious act. It is an act of anxiety and fear. And creative impulse cannot be so. So what can be creative impulse, or what can be creativity? Actually, it is a combinatory play. Combinatory play means it is not that out of a blue something occurs, prior ideas already at work, we merely fuse them, we merely cogetire them, that we combine them. And plenty of examples you find in Albert Einstein would say combinatory play seems to be the essential feature in productive thought. For example, rugby, right? Rugby is a game which has generated out of football and handball, right? Similarly, Kostler says that history of ideas show that history of science is nothing but a marriage between it is a history of marriage between the ideas which were previously strangers to each other and frequently considered incompatible ideas. When we combine them, probably there is creativity. For example, motion of tides related when to motion of the moon, unrelated structures with more striking synthesis, and plenty of electromagnetism. And I'm sure uh, you must be knowing that there was compass needle of the compass which had which vibrated in some direction. But this is the reference that I could find. Similarly, Pythagorean theorem, it combined arithmetic and geometry. Einstein combined energy and matter. This combination that generates out of the previous existing ideas, I believe this provides a background, this provides us a groundwork to work on creativity. And we as humans, we do not live in laboratories whereby everything is fixed and prior uh, given prior to us. We undergo through a rub of life, and hence we respond to these creativities in at least three forms. One is that aha moment, another is haha moment, and another reaction is aha moment. That is, aha moment is like when you're fixing your puzzle, right? The last puzzle piece, when you fix it, there is a response in the aha moment. Wonderful, amazing. And there is a haha moment is known as the comic moment of the uh, creativity. For example, it is I mean, there can be plenty of the the all the comic uh, anecdotes that we can think of. For example, there is bishop of a church who's visiting a female, and his her husband is out for some work, and when her husband returns and he finds the bishop with his wife, so he gets very disturbed, but he moves on to the window and starts waving to the people and teaching and preaching them. And now the bishop is very worried that what are you doing? So he says, the if you are performing my job, so I'm supposed to perform your job. So this kind of anecdote, this kind of example represent the haha moment, that uh, we do enjoy comic element or comedian element in our life. And the final is the aha moment, whereby we respire all the breath that we have out of ourselves, and we are in pain, we are in sorrow. So all creative moments are to be seen under these expressions of aha, haha, and of course aha. So these moments are nothing but fusion of ideas. These moments are nothing but collision of ideas. These moments are juxtaposition of ideas. And lastly, yeah, I'm done. Last slide.
It's
so,
very engrossing.
I- so lastly, if any creative work does not provide us this opportunity to encounter ourselves, if it does not give us an opportunity to introduce ourselves to ourselves, probably that moment is not creative enough. So creative moment surely transcends, helps us to transcend the given moment. It also helps us to assert ourselves through the product that we are going to make. So I believe that this event, moment of creative moment in itself, is so oceanic in character that you feel united with all plurality. There is no plurality left, if I may say. That the creative impulse in education system must, and it does, I'm sure it does, uh, provides a ground whereby this oceanic feeling of unitedness or unity or unified feeling prevails at the most. Thank you so much. I've taken much time.